Chapter 3. The Languedocian Scorpion. The Poison. In attacking small game, his usual fare, the scorpion hardly uses his weapon. He seizes the insect with his two pincers and thus holds it the whole time within reach of his mouth, which nibbles slowly. Sometimes, if the victim struggles and disturbs the repast, the tail comes curving down and, with a series of little taps, deprives the patient of the power of movement. When all is said, the sting plays but a very subordinate part in the acquisition of food. It is really of no use to the animal except in a moment of danger, face to face with an enemy. I do not know against what foes the formidable beast may have to defend itself. Who among the frequenters of the stony wastes would venture to attack it? Though I do not know on what occasions, in the normal course of things, the scorpion is obliged to take measures of defense. I can at least resort to artifice and arrange encounters which will force him to fight in grim earnest. To judge of the violence of his poison, I propose to place him in the presence of various powerful foes, without leaving the domain of entomology. A Languedocian scorpion and a Narbonne lycosa are put into a large jar, with a layer of sand at the bottom, which affords a less slippery foothold than the glass. The two are similarly equipped with poisonous fangs. Which of the two will gain the upper hand and eat the other? While the lycosa is the less powerful, she has the advantage of agility, which enables her to leap on her adversary and attack him unexpectedly. Before the defender, who is slow in countering, is able to adopt the fighting attitude, the other will deliver her stroke and flee before the brandished sting. The chances would seem to favor the active spider. The events do not correspond with these probabilities. So soon as she perceives the enemy, the lycosa stands half erect, opens her fangs, on which a drop of poison is gathering, and boldly waits. The scorpion approaches with short steps, extending his pincers in front of him. With his two-fingered hands he seizes and holds the spider, who protests desperately, opening and closing her fangs without being able to bite, kept as she is at a distance. The struggle becomes impossible with such an adversary, armed with long pincers which hold the foe helpless at arm's length and prevent her approach. Without any sort of contest, therefore, the scorpion curves his tail, brings it down in front of his forehead and drives the sting, entirely at his ease, into the victim's black breast. This is not the instantaneous thrust of the wasps and the other four-winged fighters. To make the weapon penetrate requires a certain effort. The knotted tail pushes, swaying slightly. It turns the sting to and fro as we twist a pointed tool with our fingers to make it enter a hard substance. When the hole is made, the sting lingers in the wound for a moment, doubtless to allow time for a larger dose of virus to escape. The result is overwhelming. No sooner is the sturdy lycosa stung than she draws up her legs. She is dead. I have treated myself to this stirring spectacle with half a dozen victims. What the first experiment showed me the others repeated. There is always the instant attack by the scorpion the moment he sees the lycosa, always the tactics of the tongs holding the enemy at a distance, always the sudden death of the spitted spider. If I crushed the animal underfoot, the inertia produced would be no more immediate. It is as though the lycosa had been struck dead by lightning. To eat the vanquished enemy is the rule, all the more inasmuch as the plump spider is a magnificent prey, such as but rarely falls to the scorpion's lot in his usual hunting grounds. Then and there, without delay, he sits down to his meal, commencing with the head, his customary routine with any sort of game. Motionless, he crunches and swallows in tiny mouthfuls. Everything is consumed except a few joints of the legs, which are tough morsels. The gargantuan feast lasts for 24 hours. When the banquet is over, we wonder how the dish has managed to disappear into a belly hardly larger than the thing eaten. Those who are exposed to interminable fasts, and are compelled to gorge themselves to excess when the occasion offers, must have special digestive powers. If the scorpion attacks the lycosa, who would be capable of making a serious defense were she to rush upon the enemy, instead of proudly standing with her breast uncovered, what will be the fate of the meek Epeirae? All, even the largest, the angular, the banded, and the silky Epeira, are fiercely attacked, all the more since these poor spinners, demoralized by fear, do not even try to fling their hanks of cord, which so promptly paralyze the assailant. In their webs, with a lavish discharge of snares, they would master the ferocious mantis, the formidable hornet, or the big locust, that expert kicker. Away from their own homes, faced by an enemy and not a victim, they utterly forget their potent methods of binding the foe. When stung, they all instantly succumb, struck dead like the lycosa, and the scorpion feasts upon them. Under the stone, the spider lover never meets the lycosa or the Epeirae, who frequent other regions. But he may, at long intervals, find other spiders, addicted like himself to sheltering in rocky refuges, and notably the timid clotho. He is therefore pretty familiar with this sort of game, and any fair-sized spider suits him, provided that he be hungry. I suspect him of being by no means indifferent to the capture of a praying mantis, another highly meritorious dish. Certainly, he does not go in search of her on the bushes, the usual resort of this ravenous insect. His means of climbing, which are excellently adapted to scaling a wall, would never permit him to walk on the wavering support of the leaves. He must strike when the mother is pregnant, towards the end of the summer. As a matter of fact, I fairly often find the nest of the praying mantis fastened to the lower surface of the lumps of stone haunted by the scorpion. The highwayman may make his approach, in quest of victuals, on a peaceful night, just when the laboring mother is whipping the froth of her egg-filled casket. What happens then I have never witnessed. Probably I never shall. It would be asking too much of luck. Let us fill the gap by artificial means. In the cockpit of an earthenware dish, I provoke a duel between a scorpion and a mantis, both selected of a good size. If necessary, I stimulate them, urge them to the encounter. I already know that not all the blows of the tail take effect. Very often they are mere raps on the head. Sparing of his poison and scorning to sting when there is no pressing need, the scorpion repels the intruder with a sudden back stroke of the tail, without using the needle. In our various experiments we will count only the blows which draw blood in proof that the sting has penetrated. When seized with the tweezers, the mantis instantly adopts the spectral attitude, with the saw-toothed legs open and the wings displayed like a heraldic crest. This scarecrow attitude, so far from succeeding, makes the attack all the easier. The sting plunges into the base, between the two lethal limbs, and lingers for some time in the wound. When it is withdrawn, there is still a drop of poison oozing at the tip. Then and there the mantis draws up her legs in the throes of death. The belly heaves, the caudal appendages wave by fits and starts, the tarsi give faint quivers. On the other hand, the lethal legs, the antennae, and the mouthparts are motionless. This condition is followed, in less than 15 minutes, by complete inertia. The scorpion does not think out his blows. He strikes at random any point within reach. This time he has stabbed a part which is eminently vulnerable because of the proximity of the principal nerve centers. He has stung the mantis in the breast, between the lethal legs, precisely where the mantis-killing tachytes wounds her victim with the object of paralyzing it. The act is fortuitous and not intentional. The lout is not an expert anatomist like the wasp. As luck would have it, death was instantaneous. What would happen if the sting were delivered in another, less dangerous part of the body? I change the operator to make sure that the poison file is charged. I shall take the same precaution in the various subsequent encounters. Each fresh victim will have a fresh executioner, whose full powers have been restored by a long rest. The mantis, another powerful matron, stands half erect, turns her head and looks at him warily over her shoulder. She assumes her spectral attitude, with puffing sounds produced by rubbing the wings together. Her boldness at first succeeds. She manages to seize her adversary's tail with her toothed forearms. As long as she holds tight, the scorpion is disarmed and unable to hurt her. But fatigue supervenes, enhanced by terror. The mantis had seized the tail brandished in front of her as she might have harpooned any other part of the body, without doubting the efficiency of her maneuver. The poor simpleton opens her trap. She is lost. The scorpion stings her in the abdomen, not far from the third pair of legs. Complete collapse ensues, like that of a piece of clockwork whose mainspring is broken. It is not in my power to obtain stings at this or that point as I choose. The irascible scorpion does not lend himself to the liberty of attempting to guide his weapon. I make the most of the various instances that occur in the hazards of the contest. Some of them are worth recording, because of the great distance from the centers of innervation. This time the mantis is stung on one of the lethal limbs, in the fine skin joint of the arm and forearm. This results in immediate inertia of the limb affected and soon after of the second. The other legs curl up, there are pulsations of the abdomen, and absolute immobility quickly follows. Death is almost instantaneous. Another is stung in the joint between the shank and the thigh of one of the middle legs. Suddenly the four hind legs fold back. The wings which the insect had not outspread at the moment of the attack are unfurled convulsively, as in the spectral attitude, and remain outspread even after death. The murderous legs flounder about in disorder. They clutch, they open, they close again. The antennae move, the palpi tremble, the abdomen throbs, the caudal appendages wave to and fro. Another 15 minutes of this tumultuous death struggle, and all is still. The mantis is no more. And so in all the instances in which my curiosity, greatly excited by the stirring aspect of the tragedy, indulges whatever the point attacked, whether near the nerve centers or farther away, the mantis always succumbs, sometimes instantly, sometimes after a few minutes' convulsions. Rattlesnakes, vipers, puff adders, and other venomous snakes of dreadful renown do not kill their victims more promptly. At first I regarded this as due to a highly strung organism, which is all the more sensitive and vulnerable because it is better equipped. Picked creatures both, said I to myself, the spider and the mantis die instantaneously from an injury which a ruder creature would endure for hours and days, perhaps even without any great inconvenience. Let us then try the mole cricket, the detested Tiocibo of the Provençal gardener. A strange beast indeed is this root cutter. Powerful, too, clumsy, and of a lower type. When you grip it firmly in your hand, it makes you let go by digging into your skin with the toothed toes of its hind legs, copied from the moles. When brought into contact in a narrow arena, Scorpion and mole cricket look each other in the face and seem to recognize each other. Can there have been encounters between them from time to time? It is very doubtful. The mole cricket is an inmate of our gardens, of rich soil in which green vegetables convoke underground vermin. The scorpion is faithful to the sun-scorched slopes on which dry grasses find it difficult to grow. Meetings are hardly probable between the inhabitants of barren and of fruitful soil. Though unknown to each other, they nonetheless realize the gravity of the danger confronting them. With no provocation from me, the scorpion rushes at the mole cricket, who, for her part, assumes an aggressive posture, with her shears ready to disembowel her foe. Rubbing her upper wings together, she entwines a sort of war song, a dull buzzing. The scorpion does not leave her time to finish her ditty. He brings his tail into play. The mole cricket's thorax bears a stout, arched cuirass encasing the back. To the rear of this impenetrable armor there is a deep crease, covered with fine skin. It is here that the sting enters. Forthwith, without more ado, the monster is overthrown. She collapses, as though struck by lightning. Disorderly movements follow. The digging legs are paralyzed. They no longer grip at the straw which I hold out to them. The others thresh to and fro, stretch out and flex themselves again. The four palpi with the large, fleshy tufts meet in a bunch, separate, come together again and pat the object which I place within their reach. The antennae wave feebly, the belly throbs with deep pulsations. Gradually, these death throes decrease in violence. At length, in a couple of hours' time, the tarsi, the last to die, cease quivering. The clumsy creature has succumbed no less completely than the lycosa and the mantis, but after a longer death struggle. It remains to be ascertained whether the stab under the armor of the thorax does not possess a special efficiency, because of the proximity of the nerve centers. I repeat the experiment with other patients and other operators. Sometimes the sting enters the chink in the armor. More often it touches some part of the abdomen. In this case, even though the stab is delivered at the extreme tip, the result is always sudden death. The only perceptible difference is that, instead of being instantly paralyzed, the digging legs continue for some time to struggle like the rest. When struck by the scorpion in any part whatever, the mole cricket therefore is always mortally wounded. The powerful insect gives up the ghost after a few convulsive struggles. Now comes the turn of the gray locust, the largest and most active of our acridians. The scorpion appears perturbed by the proximity of this turbulent kicker. The locust, on her side, would be only too well pleased to get away. She hops and bumps against the pane of glass with which I have covered the arena to prevent escape. From time to time she drops on the back of the scorpion, who flees to avoid this sudden fall. At last, losing patience, the runaway stings the locust in the belly. The shock must be of extraordinary violence, for one of the big haunched legs immediately falls off, through one of those spontaneous disarticulations to which locusts and grasshoppers are addicted at desperate moments. The other is paralyzed. Stretched straight out and up, it is no longer able to obtain a purchase on the ground. The locust's hopping days are over. Meanwhile, the four front legs make disorderly movements and are incapable of progression. When laid on its side, the insect nevertheless turns over and resumes the normal position, all but the large hind leg, which is still impotent and sticking into the air. 15 minutes pass, and the insect falls, never to rise again. The spasms, the stretching of the legs, the quivering of the tarsi, the waving of the antennae continue for a long time yet. This condition, becoming more and more aggravated, may last till next day. But sometimes the inertia is complete in less than an hour. Another powerful acridian, the trixalis, with the immensely long shanks and the sugarloaf head, ends like the locust. Her death agony lasts some hours. Among the sword-bearers, the grasshoppers, I have seen this gradual paralysis which is not yet death, but which is no longer life, prolonged for a week. This time the subject is the vine ephipiger. The pot-bellied creature has been stung in the abdomen. There are cries of distress from the cymbals at the moment of the wound, and the insect falls on its side, with all the appearances of imminent death. Nevertheless, the wounded ephipiger makes a fight for it. At the end of 2 days, she is kicking so hard with her ataxic legs, incapable of locomotion, that the idea occurs to me to come to her assistance and doctor her up a little. I administer as a cordial, on the tip of a straw, some grape juice which is readily accepted. It seems as though the draught is effectual. The insect appears to be recovering. Nothing of the sort. Alas! On the 7th day after the sting, the patient dies. The scorpion's sting is inexorable, for any insect, even of the strongest. One dies on the spot, another lingers for days, but all succumb in the end. Even though my ephipiger were to survive for a week, I should know better than to ascribe this to my doctoring with grape juice. The grasshopper's long resistance must be attributed to her temperament. We must consider above all things the gravity of the wound, which varies greatly according to the dose of poison injected. It is not in my power to regulate its emission. Besides, the scorpion is freakish in the flow of the poison from his phial. In one case he is stingy, and in another prodigal. For this reason, the discrepancy is great between the data furnished by the Ephipiger. My notes speak of subjects succumbing after a brief interval, whereas others, more numerous, take a long time to die. Generally, the grasshoppers resist better than the locusts. The Ephipiger bears witness to this and, next to her, so does the white-faced Decticus, the chief of the sword-bearing clan. The insect with the large mandibles and the ivory head is stabbed near the middle of the abdomen, on the dorsal surface. The wounded Decticus, apparently not gravely injured, walks about and tries to hop. Half an hour later, however, the poison is working. The abdomen is convulsed, curves into a wide hook and, with its open gap, incapable of closing, plows through the rough surface of the soil. The proud creature has become a pitiful cripple. 6 hours later, the insect is lying on its side. It exhausts itself in unsuccessful attempts to rise on its feet. Little by little, the crisis subsides. On the second day, the Decticus is dead. Really dead. Not a limb stirs. Late in the afternoon, the great black and yellow dragonfly flies to and fro in a straight line, swiftly and silently, along the hedges. She is the corsair who levies tribute on all who navigate those peaceful waters. Her ardent life, her fiery activity point to a more delicate nervous system than that of the locust, the placid ruminant of the pastures. And in fact, when stung by the scorpion, she dies almost as quickly as the praying mantis. The cicada, another spendthrift of energy, who from morning till night, in the dog days, never ceases singing by jerking his abdomen up and down, beating time to the cadence of his cymbals, likewise dies very speedily. Talents have to be paid for. Where the dull-witted hold out, the gifted succumb. The large beetles, in their horny armor, are invulnerable. Never will the scorpion, a clumsy fencer who lunges at random, find the narrow joints in their breastplates. As for piercing the hard wrapper at some spot or another, this would need a protracted effort, which the patient would hardly permit in the scuffle of his defense. Besides, these boring tactics are unknown to the brutal scorpion, who delivers a sudden stab. One region alone lends itself to the sudden onslaught of the sting. This is the upper surface of the abdomen, which is quite soft and protected by the wing cases. I uncover this region by holding up the wings and wing cases with a pair of tweezers, or again I first remove both with the scissors. This mutilation is not a serious matter and would not prevent the patient from surviving quite a long time. The insect is presented to the scorpion in this condition. It is chosen among the largest: oryx, capricorn, scarab, carabus, cetonia, cockchafer, geotrupes. All perish by the sting, but the length of the death struggle varies very greatly. To give a few examples, after convulsive stretching of the limbs, the scarab beetle hoists himself on his legs as high as he can, hunches his back and marks time, for lack of coordination in the locomotor mechanism. He capsizes, incapable of recovering his footing. He kicks wildly. At length, in a few hours, immobility sets in. The insect is dead. The Capricorn's Cerambyx heroes, who lives in the oak and sea, Cerdo, who lives in the hawthorn and the cherry laurel, begin in the same way with a sort of cataleptic fit which sometimes lasts for a fairly long time. To some of them, death does not come until the next day. Others are unable to hold out for more than 3 or 4 hours. The result is the same with the cetonia or rosechafer, the common cockchafer, and the magnificently antlered pinechafer. A pitiful sight is that of the golden carabus, or gold beetle, dying of the sting. Unable to stand on its legs convulsively extended into stilts, the insect tumbles over, picks itself up again falls down and again hoists itself to its feet, only to fall once more. The tip of the intestine, with its horny armor, sticks out and swells as though the creature were about to discharge its entrails. The crop belches a black torrent that swamps the head. The golden wing cases, lifting their cuirass, reveal the poor nudities of the abdomen. Next morning, the tarsi are still quivering. Death is not far off. The swarthy Procrustes, the gold beetle's near kinsman, comes to his end in the same wretched fashion. To him we shall return. Would you, on the other hand, see a stoic who knows how to die decently? Make the scorpion sting Oryx nasicornis, commonly known as the rhinoceros. None of our beetles equals him for hardy bearing. Despite the horn on his nose, he is a peace lover, dwelling, during his larval period, in old olive stumps. When stabbed by the scorpion, he seems at first to feel nothing. He walks about soberly as usual and keeps his balance. But suddenly the atrocious poison works. The legs no longer obey with their customary accuracy. The wounded beetle staggers and falls on his back. He will never rise again. Lying in this posture for 3 or 4 days, with no struggle beyond some vague dying movements, he very quietly gives up the ghost. How do the moths and butterflies behave in their turn? These delicate creatures must be very sensitive to the sting. I am persuaded of it before I put them to the test. Nevertheless, as scrupulous observers, let us experiment. A swallowtail and a vulcan perish the moment they are stung. I expected it. The spurge hawk moth and the striped hawk moth offer no more resistance. They too suffer sudden death, just like the dragonfly, the lycosa, and the mantis. But, to my great surprise, the great peacock moth seems invulnerable. True, the attack is difficult to deliver. The sting goes astray in the soft down, which at each stroke flies away in flocks. Despite repeated blows, I am not sure whether the sting has actually struck home. I accordingly stripped the abdomen, laying bare the skin. After taking this precaution, I plainly see the weapon driven in. Penetration is now indubitable. It was preceded by other, more doubtful stabs, and yet the big moth remains impassive. I place her under a wire gauze cover standing on the table. She grips the trellis work and remains there all day long without moving. The wings, outspread to their full width, give not a quiver. Next morning there is no change. The victim of the operation is still hanging to the wires by the hooks of her front tarsi. I remove her and lay her on the table, with her belly uppermost. The big body shakes with rapid tremors. Is this the end? Not at all. The apparently dying moth revives, flaps her wings, and with a sudden effort, recovers her feet. She climbs up the trellis and again hangs from it. In the afternoon, I lay her on her back for the second time. The wings are actuated by a gentle movement, almost a shudder, as a result of which the prostrate insect glides over the table, climbs up the trellis again, and all movement ceases. Let us leave the poor moth in peace. When she is really no more, she will drop off. Well, the fall does not take place until the 4th day after the sting or stings. Life is exhausted. The deceased is a female. The force of maternity, stronger than any mortal terror, postpones death's hour. The moth laid her eggs before she died. Should we entertain the very natural thought of attributing this long resistance to the colossus' powerful constitution, the frail product of our silkworm nurseries, the mulberry bombyx, would tell us that we must seek the cause elsewhere. He, the infirm dwarf who has just the strength to beat his wings and flutter round his female, offers no less resistance to the sting than the great peacock. The reason for this passivity is probably as follows. The great peacock and the mulberry moth are incomplete entities, very different from the hawk moth, that ardent explorer of Kerala's in the gloaming, and the swallowtail butterfly and the mulberry moth, those untiring pilgrims to the chapel of flowers. They have no mouth implements, they take no nourishment. Deprived of the stimulus of food, they live but a few days, long enough to lay fertile eggs. This diminished vitality must go with a no less delicate and consequently less fragile organism. Let us descend a few steps in the series of the segmented animals and question the uncouth millipede. The scorpion knows him. The colony in the enclosure has shown me the scorpion feeding on the cryptops and the lithobius, the result of his hunting. These to him are harmless mouthfuls, incapable of defense. I propose today to place him in touch with the great centipede known as the Scolopendra smorsitans, the mightiest of our myriapods. The dragon with the 22 pairs of legs is no stranger to him. I have sometimes found the two together under the same stone. The scorpion was at home. The other, roaming about at night, had taken temporary shelter there. No regrettable incident had ensued from their cohabitation. Is this always so? We shall see. I confront the two horrors with each other in a large glass jar containing sand. The centipede goes round and round, hugging the wall of the arena. He is an undulating ribbon, a finger's breadth wide, 4 or 5 inches long and ringed with greenish rings on an amber-colored ground. The long, vibrating antennae sound the space before him. Their tips, sensitive as a finger, encounter the motionless scorpion. The startled animal instantly turns tail. His circuit brings him back to the foe. There is a fresh contact, followed by a fresh flight. But the scorpion is now on his guard, with his arched tail advanced and his pincers open. When the centipede returns to the dangerous point of his circular track, he is seized with the claws in the neighborhood of the head. In vain does the long, flexible animal twine and twist. Imperturbable, the scorpion grips it more firmly than ever with his pincers, and no jerks, windings, or unwindings succeed in making him let go. Meanwhile, the sting is at work. 3 and 4 times over it is driven into the sides of the myriapod, who, for his part, opens wide his poison fangs and strives to bite, without succeeding in doing so, for the front part of his body is held in the stubborn pincers. The hinder part alone struggles and wriggles, coils and uncoils. These efforts are useless. Kept at a distance by the long tongs, the Scolopendra's poisonous fangs are unable to act. I have seen many insect battles. I know none more horrible than that between these two monstrosities. It is enough to make your flesh creep. A lull enables me to part the combatants and isolate them. The centipede licks his bleeding wounds and recovers his strength in a few hours. As for the scorpion, he has suffered no damage. Next day, a fresh assault is delivered. 3 times in succession the myriapod is stabbed, till the blood flows. Then, fearing reprisals, the scorpion withdraws, as though frightened by his victory. The wounded animal does not strike back and continues its circular flight. This is enough for today. I surround the jar with a cardboard cylinder. When darkness is thus produced, they will both keep quiet. What happens afterwards, especially at night, I do not know. Probably the battle begins all over again and further thrusts of the sting are delivered. At any rate, the centipede is much weaker on the third day. On the fourth, he is dying. The scorpion watches him without yet daring to devour him. At last, when there is no more movement, the huge quarry is cut up. The head and then the first two segments are eaten. The dish is too copious. The remainder will go bad and be wasted. His exclusive taste for fresh meat will prevent the scorpion from touching it. Though stung 7 times and more often, the centipede does not die until the 4th day. Stung once only, the powerful Lycosa perishes that very instant. Death comes almost as quickly to the praying mantis, the sacred beetle, the mole cricket and other hardy specimens which, if impaled by the collector, would kick and struggle for weeks on the cork slab. Any insect stabbed by the sting finds itself forthwith in a parlous plight. The longest lived are dead within 24 hours. And here we have the centipedes, pinked 7 times over, holding out for 4 days and perhaps dying from loss of blood as much as from the effects of the poison. Why these points of difference? Apparently they are a matter of organization. Life is an equilibrium whose stability varies according to the position in the hierarchy. At the top of the ladder, a fall is easy. At the bottom, there is a firm foothold. The finely organized insect succumbs, whereas the coarser millipede resists. Is this really the explanation? The mole cricket leaves us undecided. He, the boar, perishes just as quickly as do those refined creatures, the butterfly and the mantis. No, we do not yet know the secret which the scorpion conceals in the file at the end of his tail.